Let's start out this video with a few more price drops. So a few days ago, I posted a whole bunch of Amazon coupon codes that brought a lot of GPUs down to fairly reasonable prices, but those have pretty much all expired at this point. However, there are a couple more available that I posted on my community page yesterday. Checked this morning, they are still available as of the time of filming. And it's on the Power Color Hellhound AMD Radeon 7900 XTX. Again, listed at $930, but with a $100 coupon code available, which does just apply in cart at checkout, bringing it down to $830. And that does come with the Resident Evil 4 bundle, which, as I said in my last video on this, I think is a really good game. So I think, sometimes game bundles are like, meh, I didn't want it anyway. I think that one's pretty good, so worth thinking about. Also, the Power Color Red Devil, it's also the 7900 XTX, but this is their higher-end, cooler model, is a little bit more, but still at $980 minus a $100 coupon code, bringing it down to $880. That's still well below the original MSRP of the XTX, and is one of the highest cooler models available for this card. So anyway, I've been doing a lot of revisits on my 7900 XTX versus the 4080 and the 4090 on my channel, so you can check out how those stack up. But what's really interesting about these is, especially like when you look at the Hellhound coming in at $830 plus a game, price-wise, that's putting it into competition with the 4070 Ti, not even the 4080. It's closer in price to a 4070 Ti now than it is to a 4080, right? 4080s still coming in around $1,100, but the 4070 Ti coming in right at around $800. So while the 7900 XTX is an interesting competitor to the 4080 performance-wise, if its price starts to bring it in line with the 4070 Ti, which is where we're starting to see it, is still more expensive, but getting fairly close, this starts being really interesting, especially when you get into like $800 for a 12 gigabyte 4070 Ti. And then some of the NVIDIA advantages with ray tracing fade a bit when your baseline performance is a lot higher. If prices like this become available a little while longer or become more normal, I might need to do a 7900 XTX versus 4070 Ti video because honestly, it's starting to be a price competitor there, which is really interesting. Also, I noticed that MSI has now listed their RX 7600 on Amazon, and without any kind of coupon code or anything, it's just $249.99. Now, that's interesting because this is a very recent card with a $269.99 MSRP. But MSI is just listing their model at $250, so below MSRP without even showing any kind of price discount on it. And again, this one does come with the RE4 bundle. The 7600, I think, would have got a lot more favorable reviews at its launch if it had just launched at this price of $250, because then I think it is very attractive at that price. The problem at $270 was like, well, you get really similar performance for about $240 or $250 with cards like the 6600 XT and 6650 XT. But bringing this down more in line with those prices, plus with like the AV1 encoder from this generation, this is interesting stuff. Now, another thing that I've seen posted, but I hadn't noticed myself because I think this is only available in-store at Micro Center. Now, that's helpful for a lot of people, but for a lot of people like me, it would take all day to drive to a Micro Center, and you're definitely going to lose anything you gained on the price in gas and time. But if you do live near a Micro Center, you might want to take a look out for an RX 7900 XT. This is not the XTX model, XT, available at $699 apparently. At some Micro Center listings. But again, I believe it's a pickup in-store kind of a deal. I think Micro Center has an easier time giving those price cuts, given that if you have to come in the door to get it, they're hoping that you leave buying some other items. So even if they're losing some margin on this, maybe they make their money back as you pick up, a few other things as you walk through the store. Now, let's get to the next story. So we have more RTX 4060 leaked performance numbers as we get closer and closer to the launch date. This is coming from videocards.com. And so what is their source of this information? What kind of information is it? So they're saying that the RTX 4060 has already been tested by some reviewers, but the results of their work cannot be shared before the embargo lifts on June 28th. However, they're saying luckily we, meaning videocards.com, managed to obtain some scores from some of them to get a better understanding of where the RTX 4060 may land. So what this sounds like to me is videocards.com has spoken with some people reviewing this card and has been given the 3D Mark scores. And they are now comparing them versus the RTX 3060 12 gigabyte and the 3060 8 gigabyte. Now, those of you who have been paying attention to the space will know that the 3060 launched as a 12 gigabyte graphics card, and then much later, without much fanfare or review samples, NVIDIA also launched an 8 gigabyte version, which not only has a lot less VRAM, but cut it down to 128-bit memory bus, which also reduces the total memory bandwidth and overall performance in a lot of situations, even when not spilling over the VRAM capacity, but just because of the lesser memory bandwidth. So there is an 8 gigabyte 3060, and so both of these comparison numbers are being given. So we're seeing that the relative performance to the 3060 12 gigabyte in the various 3D Mark apps are in Speedway, it's 16.6% faster. In Port Royal, it's 17.2% faster. I believe these are the ray tracing benchmarks in 3D Mark. But versus the 8 gigabyte model, it's a more impressive 58.4% faster in Speedway and 30.7% faster in Port Royal. The time spy numbers, it looks like we're seeing it 30.3% faster than the 12 gigabyte model at the performance mode, and 55.3% faster than the 8 gigabyte model. And in the Time Spy Extreme, we're seeing 32.7% faster than the 12 gigabyte and 61.1% faster. Time Spy is a DX12 test without ray tracing. And then if you drop down to Firestrike, we have Performance, Extreme, and Ultra, and again, you're seeing 19.8, 23.4, and 19.4% faster than the 12 gigabyte model, 38%, 41.8, and 50% faster than the 8 gigabyte model. So that's, according to videocards.com's analysis, is showing that means that the 4060 is 22.8% faster than the 3060 12 gigabyte in synthetic testing using all of the 3D Mark tests averaged, and 47.9% faster than the 8 gigabyte version. And hopefully this is accentuating why I always say don't buy the 8 gigabyte 3060, get the 12 gigabyte version. Anyway, so that is interesting stuff. It's also, they've also put this up against the results that are available from 3D Mark for a lot of other graphics cards. So you can see, it looks like the way they've sorted the data in these charts is setting the 4060 Ti as the baseline of 100%, and then you can see how the 4060 as well as the other GPUs fall relative to that. So remember, Speedway and Port Royal are ray tracing performance numbers, and we're seeing the 4060 reaching 80% of the 4060 Ti in Speedway, but 75% of the 4060 Ti's performance in Port Royal. How does that stack up against some other stuff? You can see that it is definitely slower than the 3060 Ti in both of those tests by a noticeable degree, which is interesting. And then you can also see how it stacks up. It is faster than cards like the RX 7600. I'd be interested to see where the 6700 XT would fall in this, because that has been only a little bit more than $300 recently, and is going to be an interesting competitor for the 4060. 3D Mark Time Spy graphs, so again, this is without ray tracing. We see the 4060 now very close to the 3060 Ti in performance, but slower. And again, we've already said it's faster than the 3060. Compared to the RX 7600 from AMD, it's looking like they are very similar in performance, but the 4060 is a few percent ahead in both Time Spy and Time Spy Extreme. Again, it looks like close, but again, ahead of the RX 7600. And then in 3D Mark Firestrike, which is DX11 tests, and AMD GPUs tend to stack up better in these tests, just in general. seems to be the trend just for a long time now. Now the 4060, again, is falling behind the performance of the 3060 Ti. And then now is in Firestrike, it looks like the 7600 is ahead of the 4060. In Firestrike Extreme, that lead actually, is still ahead there, and even the 6650 XT is actually ahead in these tests as well. And then Firestrike Ultra, which is a 4K resolution test, the 7600 is once again ahead here. So in the Firestrike test where AMD tends to do better, the 7600 is ahead. Anyway, so overall, remember that none of this should come as too big of a surprise, given that NVIDIA a long time ago already claimed a 20% or 1.2 times the performance of the RTX 3060. Although at least one thing that this can answer is some people, when they saw these charts, were suspicious that NVIDIA might be using the 8GB 3060 as this baseline to improve what it looks like. But this seems to make it very clear, especially in what we saw with this matchup, that the 20% number does seem to be fairly realistic given these synthetic benchmarks at least. And it does appear to be versus the 12GB model, because versus the 8GB model, the performance numbers were a lot larger. So there we go with some of this. We still do not have actual gaming benchmarks out in the wild yet, but according to the article here, well, I mean, we know this card's launching in just a few days now at this point. Anyway, let's move on to a few other topics before we go. So buried in a lot of the whole battling it out over the Activision acquisition and all of that, Xbox has claimed that they have lost the console wars. They're consistently selling less than Sony and Nintendo. They've been in third place. But almost more interestingly is that next-gen consoles could be expected in 2028. This appears to be a reference to when you could expect to see a Call of Duty game on a console like the PlayStation 6. So anyway, could give us into a peek into where Microsoft, at least at this point, expects us to see a new console generation, which is kind of interesting. Now, let's jump over to DirectStorage. So far, DirectStorage has only been implemented in the game Forspoken on PC. This technology is designed to greatly increase load times, and on some versions of it that have GPU decompression, which was not featured in Forspoken, it could hopefully help put PCs more into competition with how the consoles handle their fast SSDs and decompression and all of that. When the Diablo 4 beta was out, some people had noticed references to DirectStorage within the code of the game, but it was unclear and had never been announced whether or not Diablo 4 actually supported DirectStorage. Well, PC Gamer has now confirmed that DirectStorage is not currently working in the game, but that the developers are planning on enabling it in the future. So that should be interesting to keep an eye on, because it is going to be cool to see as DirectStorage picks up, if this does end up having any kind of meaningful help for PCs. I'm curious is whether once we get DirectStorage with the actual GPU decompression, if it's going to help. And we've seen a lot of CPU bottlenecks lately, especially in games that are like, a PS5 game where it has hardware decompression of a bunch of, when you get a whole bunch of high-res assets streaming in, if the CPU is having to decompress that, I'm wondering if getting DirectStorage with GPU decompression on that could help us in those situations, but we have yet to see it out in many games. Now, over at Phoronix, we're seeing indications that Intel's Arc graphics drivers on Linux have been sped up recently with the latest Mesa 23.2 code, which is interesting. They go into a lot more detail here if you're interested, but I'm going to move on. But all my sources will be in the video description today, as usual. Looks like the Founders Edition models of the RTX 40 cards have finally launched in China, but we're back to scalpers, apparently, where they were all bought up and then relisted at higher prices. I had hoped we had moved beyond GPU scalping, but maybe the Founders Edition models are just so different or desirable that they feel like they can get away with scalping those now. I don't know, guys. Now we're seeing more indication that the Raptor Lake Refresh is real. There's been one announcement from Intel China talking about their new branding, how they're changing the Core I number and then Core Ultra. And honestly, I need to read more into this to make sure I'm wrapping my head around their new naming scheme. But apparently to help out with that, the Intel China did talk about how those naming schemes will break down. But as they were doing that, they did list the Raptor Lake Refresh as part of some of these charts, which would be the first listing of a Raptor Lake Refresh officially from Intel, although it's Intel China, and it seems like they maybe weren't supposed to quite say that yet. We're also then seeing Raptor Lake Refresh now supported by processor identification utility as well. So this is definitely incoming. And anyway, in terms of other CPUs incoming, this is kind of interesting from videocards.com. Apparently they spotted on Gigabyte's motherboard website a listing for a Ryzen 7 5700, but this is not the 5700X, which is already out. This is just a 5700. It seems specs-wise to basically be a 5700G, but without the integrated graphics, but it's unclear if this is something that we're going to be seeing AMD launch at some point. But anyway, thought I'd at least bring that up there. And in other news, Microsoft DX12 Agility SDK has been updated to speed up a variety of things. It's looking like the main points here are work graphs, which I believe is making it easier to GPU accelerate a variety of tasks. Also, wave matrix driver support, which, a lot of AI applications, I think, want to use a wave matrix multiply and compute, and GPU. This is building in better support for that, and then also AV1 encoding directly through the DX12 layer. Anyway, a lot of this, I think, is more interesting to developers and all of that rather than my audience. So moving on, apparently Meta, in response to Apple's Vision Pro, is looking to claw out some more performance from their Quest 2 and Quest Pro through a software update rather than a hardware update. They are claiming up to, and that's a key word here, not just a 26% CPU performance increase, but up to a 26%. In other words, there's probably been some kind of bottleneck in certain situations removed that in certain situations could improve CPU performance by 26%. But I would highly doubt you would see anything like that across the board in all situations. And up to 19% GPU speed increase for the Quest 2 and 11% GPU speed increase for Quest Pro. Also, it looks like they're enabling dynamic resolution scaling for Quest 2 and Quest Pro, so games and apps can take advantage of increased pixel density without dropping frames. And the last thing I'll mention today is that Nixxes is apparently working more and more on remasters. And this is interesting. So Nixxes has been a studio that has been bringing us some of the PlayStation exclusives being ported to PC, which has been, at least the ones ported by Nixxes, I think have been particularly good, especially relative to some of the other ones. But it's interesting to see them talking about more remasters. Now, this is now where we can jump into wild speculation of what PlayStation game would we like to see remastered by Nixxes, and then maybe that would mean it's also coming to PC. Personally, I want Bloodborne. I literally bought a PlayStation 4 pretty much mostly just to play Bloodborne. I would love to get a remastered version and on PC. That would be pretty cool. But anyway, I think that's what I've got for you guys today. Again, if you're interested in some of these discounts on some of the cards. I will post some of my affiliate links in a pinned comment or video description or somewhere around there. Again, I do earn money from those links. I don't want to hide that, but I try to post these deals as like a win-win, where it's basically like, I need to monitor GPU pricing as part of my analysis for the videos that I do. If I find good ones, I might as well post them for you guys, because that's useful for you. And if they happen to be on Amazon, although I do post other ones too, I do earn money on qualifying purchases through those links, but that doesn't cost you anything else. I just don't want to make sure I'm not hiding that, and I'm also not trying to sell you anything that I don't think is a price drop that's worth taking a look at. Anyway, I hope all of you have an excellent day.